Throughout Toronto's underworld, Marcello Falco had a reputation that preceded him like a cold front off Lake Ontario in January. The man had turned away offers of alliance, offers of marriage, and offers of something far personal from women who had stopped traffic at charity galas and film premieres and the private booths of his club on King Street West. A senator's niece who had sent a note to his table on cream vellum. A Montreal crime family's eldest daughter who arrived at his offices unannounced and left the same way, 10 minutes later, having accomplished nothing. A former Miss Canada who had slid a room key across the table at the Four Seasons and received in return a polite nod toward the exit and a refill of her wine, which was as close to warmth as Marcello Falco had offered anyone in years. At 38, he was the head of the Falco Syndicate, a network of import logistics, private security contracts, and the kind of business that never made it onto a tax return. He had built it back from rubble at 19, the week after he buried his father. He had not stopped moving since. He did not have the luxury of sentiment. He did not have the patience for company. For nearly 2 decades, he had managed both conditions without much difficulty. That ended on a Thursday night in November, when a woman he had never seen in his life walked through the glass doors of his Bay Street offices carrying what he would have paid any sum to get back. The first thing that went wrong that Thursday started in the alley behind Falco's private lounge on Adelaide Street. Marcello had been finishing a conversation with 2 men from the Torisi crew out of Hamilton, conducted in the careful, neutral language of people with guns at their ribs. The Torisi family had been pushing west for months, testing every border with the patience of a slow leak. The meeting ended without incident. That, as his underboss Rinaldo observed afterward, was the first sign something was wrong. They made it 4 steps into the alley before the men appeared. 6 of them, moving hard from both ends of the passage. Marcello registered the suppressed weapons before he registered the faces beneath the balaclavas. What happened next lasted 90 seconds. Rinaldo put 2 men down before a third grazed his shoulder. Marcello, who had learned to fight in places far less civilized than a Toronto alley, handled the rest with a precision that left no room for dramatics. When the last man was on the ground and the alley was quiet again, except for the hiss of sleet against brick, Marcello straightened his coat and looked down at his right hand. The watch was gone. It was a pocket watch, silver, heavier than it looked, with a face so old the Roman numerals had worn to shadows. His father Giovanni had carried it every day of his adult life. On the night before he died, he had pressed it into Marcello's hands and said quietly, "Keep this. As long as you have it, I'm with you." The back was engraved with 2 sets of initials and a year, GF. MF, 1986, and beneath them, worn almost to illegibility from decades of a thumb running over it, Sempre Conte, always with you. In the Falco family, that watch was not jewelry. It was the closest thing to a sacrament they had. "Turn around," Marcello said. His voice was flat. "Find it." They searched for 2 hours. They found nothing. 3 blocks north and 4 blocks east, Josée Boivin was hauling a garbage bag the size of a small child toward the service entrance of the Marquette Hotel on Simcoe Street. It was 1:45. She had been on shift since 3 in the afternoon. Her feet, wedged into non-slip housekeeping shoes a size too small because the supply room had been out of 12s for a week, were communicating directly with her brain in a language she could only describe as fluent misery. Her dark hair had frizzed out of its bun from 8 hours of moving between laundry rooms and guest floors, and she had a knot in her lower back that had been present since Tuesday and showed no signs of leaving. Josée was 26 years old. She stood 5'3" and weighed close to 270 pounds, wide hips, a full stomach, a round face that people described, when they bothered to notice it at all, as pretty for a big girl. She had stopped registering that qualifier around age 12. It was not worth the energy. She had come to Toronto from Sherbrooke 6 years ago when her mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis made clear that the care facility she needed was going to cost more than Josée could earn working retail back home. She worked double shifts at the Marquette 4 days a week and picked up extra hours wherever the scheduler would give them. She ate a granola bar for lunch and called her mother every morning at 9, even on the days her mother didn't know who was calling. She was not unhappy exactly. She just didn't have much room to be anything else. She was cutting through the service lane off Simcoe, the shortcut that saved 4 minutes on the walk to the subway, when her shoe caught on something in the gutter. She lurched sideways, one hand slapping against the wet brick wall to catch herself. "Tabarnak," she said under her breath, which was the most complete expression she had for her current feelings. She looked down to see what had tripped her. Under the orange glow of the street lamp, half buried in sleet and gutter runoff, something glinted. She crouched down, knees protesting the cold, and worked the object free with 2 fingers. A pocket watch. She turned it over in her palm. Heavy, old silver or something close to it, the kind of craftsmanship she had seen in museum display cases. She tilted it under the street lamp and found the catch, and the back clicked open. An engraving, 2 sets of initials and a year, and beneath that, worn almost smooth from what looked like decades of contact, Sempre Conté. Josée sat with that for a long moment. She knew what this was worth. There was a vintage dealer on Queen West she walked past twice a week. She was 3 weeks behind on her mother's supplemental care fees, the portion OHIP didn't cover. There was a crack in her apartment window she had been ignoring since September. The radiator sounded like someone shaking a tin can full of bolts. She held the watch in her palm and read the inscription again, and she thought about the way her mother sometimes had days where she remembered everything. Remembered José's name, remembered the kitchen in Sherbrooke, remembered the smell of cedar in winter, and on those days would take José's hand and hold it like she was afraid to let go. She thought about what it would feel like to lose the last thing your father had ever given you. She slipped the watch into the front pocket of her housekeeping apron. "You're an idiot, Josée," she thought, but she already knew what she was going to do. She had heard something happening earlier, muffled and sharp from the direction of Adelaide Street. The kind of sound that the city absorbs and buries, but that you notice anyway if you've lived in it long enough. A few dark-plated SUVs had gone through too fast around 11. She had a reasonable guess about where the watch had come from. She would find out who it belonged to, she would return it, and then she would go home and have cereal for dinner and try not to think about the window. It took her most of Friday. The lounge on Adelaide had no signage, but the building's corporate registration was publicly searchable. The holding company traced back to Falco Import and Export Limited, registered to a Bay Street address. She wore her best clothes, dark trousers from Value Village, a white blouse that fit well across the shoulders, a wool coat she had found at the Salvation Army that looked almost intentional. She had not done anything special with her hair. She was returning a lost object, not presenting herself to a panel. The lobby of Falco Import and Export was the kind of lobby designed to make most people reconsider why they'd come. Black marble floors. A security desk, staffed by a man who looked like he had played linebacker at some point in his past and had simply never transitioned out of it. 2 more men near the elevator bank who were not technically doing anything threatening, but were doing nothing else either. "I need to speak with whoever is in charge," Josée said at the desk. "I have something that belongs to them." The guard looked at her with the expression of someone whose time was being consumed against his will. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Then, I have something that belongs to someone in this building," she said again. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not here to sell it back. I found it, and I want to return it, and then I'll leave. I can wait." She sat down in a chair by the window, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. She waited 40 minutes. The security guard made 2 calls. She ate a mint from her coat pocket. A woman in a tailored blazer walked past and gave Josée a look that catalogued the Value Village trousers and the coat and arrived at a conclusion, and Josée met her eyes with the same patient steadiness she used on hotel guests who complained that their room hadn't been cleaned to their specifications. Then the elevator opened. The man who stepped out was not what she had expected, and she had expected something. He was well over 6 feet, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a face that had been handsome once, and was still handsome now, but in a way that had been worked over by something more serious than time. He wore a charcoal suit. He moved through the lobby with the particular stillness of a man who had never once had to announce his arrival. 2 men flanked him. 4 more materialized from corners of the lobby she hadn't noticed were occupied. His eyes found her immediately. She stood up. "Mr. Falco." Her voice came out level. "Good. My name is Josée Boivin. I found something last night near Adelaide Street. I believe it's yours." She reached into her coat pocket. Across the lobby, several pairs of hands moved toward jacket interiors. Marcello raised 1 finger, barely perceptibly, and they stopped. She held out the pocket watch on her open palm. The silence that came over Marcello Falco was unlike any silence she had ever seen on a person's face. It was the kind that happened when something a person had stopped believing in suddenly reappeared. His eyes dropped to the watch, his jaw tightened once, and then went very still. He reached out and took it from her. His fingers were warm against her cold hand, and for 1 strange second the contact held. Then he had the watch, and she had her hand back, and he was turning the silver case over in his palm, as though confirming it was real. "Where did you find it?" he said. His voice was quieter than she'd expected. "Service lane off Simcoe. It was in the gutter." She paused. There were initials engraved on the back. I figured whoever lost it would want it returned. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, the kind of look trying to understand something it hadn't been prepared for. She was aware of what she looked like, tired, plainly dressed, her face bare, her coat doing an imperfect job of managing her silhouette. She had spent most of her life being assessed by people who saw the size of her body and stopped there. Marcello Falco did not look like he had stopped anywhere. "Do you know what this is worth?" he said. "Quite a bit, I'd imagine. It's old silver. A vintage dealer would have paid you enough to clear several months of rent." "I'm sure." She picked up her bag from the chair. It had a sentimental inscription. It was clearly important to someone. She moved toward the revolving door. "I hope you sort out whatever happened on Adelaide." "Have a good afternoon, Mr. Falco." She had taken exactly 4 steps when she heard it, the scream of tires from the street outside, close and purposeful. Rinaldo's voice came from somewhere behind her. "Boss, black sedan, Torrisi." Josée didn't know what that meant, but she understood the next thing clearly enough. A hand closed around her arm and she was moving, fast, sideways, as the plate glass of the front lobby detonated inward in a spray of gunfire. Marcello Falco had her behind a marble pillar before she had finished processing what was happening. He was a wall between her and the door. His body angled to cover hers completely, and she heard more shots and shouting in the street, and then, after what felt like a long time, but was probably under 30 seconds, quiet. He turned to look at her. His suit jacket was gone. 1 sleeve of his shirt was dark. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Josée checked herself the way she always did when something needed handling. "No, you're bleeding." He looked at his arm as though he had forgotten about it. "It's a graze." "It needs cleaning." "It needs to wait." He looked past her to Rinaldo, already on a phone. "They were watching the building," Marcello said. They saws her hand something to me. I'm a housekeeper, Josée said. They don't know that. He looked back at her, and something in his expression had changed. Still controlled, still careful, but with something running underneath it that hadn't been there 60 seconds ago. They think you're working with me now. That means they'll look for you, your name, your address. You don't know my name. You gave it to the desk. She had given her full name because it had seemed polite. She closed her eyes briefly. I have to get to work, she said. I have a shift at 3. You can't go to work. My mother. Her voice changed on those 2 words in a way she couldn't prevent. She's at Sunrise Care in Etobicoke. If her supplemental fee isn't in by the end of the month, they'll move her to the ward. She has Alzheimer's. She won't understand what's happening to her. I'm all she has. Marcello held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at Rinaldo. Call Sunrise Care in Etobicoke, he said. Patient name Boivin. Have her transferred to the private memory care unit at Sunnybrook today. Single room private nursing. Put 2 of our people on the corridor. Bill it to the personal account. Josée opened her mouth. It's handled, Marcello said, not unkindly. Come with me. The estate was in Oakville, a long, low house behind a stone wall, on a street where every property was set so far back you couldn't see your neighbor's lights. It had a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a kitchen that looked rarely used, and a guest room larger than José's entire apartment. She did not feel grateful. She felt furious, which was at least more useful than frightened. On the second morning, a woman arrived with 3 garment bags and began laying dresses across the guest room bed with the practiced ease of someone who did this regularly and considered it a favor. Mr. Falco thought you might need a few things, she said pleasantly. Josée looked at the dresses. They were beautiful. They were also sized for a body that bore no resemblance to hers. These are a size 6, Josée said. We also brought some 8s. I'm a size 20. She kept her voice even. She had delivered some version of this statement hundreds of times across her life in change rooms and doctors' offices and HR departments. I have been a size 20 since I was 17. I don't apologize for it, and I don't pretend otherwise. I'm certainly not going to spend my time here trying to compress myself into something that wasn't made for me. She picked up the nearest dress, silk, probably worth more than her rent, and held it out. Please take these back. If Mr. Falco genuinely wants to do something useful, I'd appreciate my own clothes from my apartment and a phone to call my mother. The stylist left. Marcello appeared in the doorway an hour later. There was something in his expression that he was working to contain. She said you were very composed about it, he said. I was. She also said you held up a $1,400 dress to make your point. I returned it very carefully. Josée was sitting on the edge of the bed in her work trousers, and a cardigan her mother had knitted her 4 birthdays ago, slightly too short in the sleeves. She'd had stopped caring about that particular detail years ago. I don't need expensive clothes, Mr. Falco. I need to call my mother. He handed her a phone without comment. She called. Her mother was having a good day. She remembered José's name, remembered the kitchen in Sherbrooke, started to tell a story about Christmas tourtière, and then lost the thread somewhere in the middle. Josée said, C'est correct, maman. Je suis là. Her mother said, Je sais, ma belle. I know, my girl. And then the nurse came back on the line to say they would call again at 9. When Josée looked up, Marcello was still in the doorway. My father gave me that watch the night before he died, he said. He was looking past her, at the window, at the grey November dark. I've had it for 19 years. I don't pray. I don't go to Mass. But I have talked to him through that watch more times than I can count. He looked back at her. I want you to understand what you gave back to me. Josée considered him for a moment. You would have done the same, she said. No, he said quietly, I wouldn't have. She stayed 2 weeks. They ate dinner together every evening because neither of them could produce a convincing reason not to. Rinaldo brought food from a trattoria on College Street. Real food, not the elaborate catered trays she had imagined. Pasta in cream sauce, roast chicken, sfogliatelle that Marcello ate standing at the kitchen counter, which she found inexplicably humanizing. She told him about Sherbrooke, about arriving in Toronto with 2 suitcases and a staffing agency job offer, about her mother's good days and bad days, and the particular grief of losing someone who was still present in the room. He listened the way people rarely listened to her, without waiting for his turn to talk. He told her about his father, about 19 years of rebuilding something from what a murder leaves behind, about the specific loneliness of a life where everyone is either afraid of you or wants something from you, and eventually you stop being able to distinguish between the two. On the 11th night, she said, "Has anyone ever just liked you? Not the organization, you, the actual person." He considered this with the same seriousness he seemed to apply to everything. "Once," he said, "my father, and a Labrador retriever I had until I was 14. She laughed. It was the first time she had really laughed since arriving, and it seemed to catch him off guard, the sound of it, unguarded, filling the quiet of his very controlled house. He looked at her the way people look at something they hadn't known they were missing. The attack came on a Wednesday evening when the sleet had turned to proper snow, and the estate was so quiet Josée could hear the flakes against the library windows. She was in the armchair with a book she wasn't really reading. Marcello was at the desk, working through a sheaf of shipping documents, though she had noticed his attention drift toward her more than once. Then the perimeter alarm went off and the lights died all at once, and the quiet became a different kind of quiet entirely. "Behind the desk," Marcello said, and there was already a gun in his hand. Rinaldo came through the door with a tactical light, and the words "interior breach and 8 men confirmed body armor," and Josée had the strange focused clarity of someone whose body has moved past the point where panic is useful. They moved through the darkened house in a line, Rinaldo leading, Josée in the middle, Marcello behind her, one hand at her arm the entire way. Not gripping, just present. The sound of gunfire from the east wing was terrifying in its purposefulness. They were 10 feet from the basement stairwell when the corridor door at the far end exploded inward. Marcello pulled her into an alcove and stepped fully in front of her. What followed was loud and very fast, and she kept her back against the wall and her eyes on the back of his head, and then there was one shot, different from the others, lower, closer, and Marcello made a sound she had not heard from him before. He was on one knee by the time she got around him, dark spreading on his left side. Rinaldo was already on his phone. Josée had her hands on Marcello's jacket before she had consciously decided to move. "I need light," she said to Rinaldo. "It's not," Marcello started. "Don't tell me it's not serious. You're pale and your breathing is wrong." She had worked enough late-night hotel shifts to know what controlled shock looked like on a person. "Where is the first aid kit?" He told her. She worked on him in the basement, hands steady in the particular way they always got when something needed doing. The same steadiness she used on the mornings she brought her mother to therapy appointments, and her mother cried without knowing why. Entry wound high on his left side, not the lung, but close enough that she kept her compress firm, and her voice deliberately, even while she talked Rinaldo through what she needed until the surgeon arrived 38 minutes later. She did not leave the room. Marcello watched her from the cot when it was over. Cleaned and stitched, something in his face stripped down to its foundation. He looked younger than he did when he was managing everything at once. "You stayed," he said. "Of course I did. You should have gone." "Gone where?" She pulled the chair closer and sat down. The snow was steady against the high basement window, Besides, you still have my good coat upstairs." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Then, "The Teresi family is finished. Rinaldo handled it while we were down here. Tonight was the last of it." "Okay. You can go home, José, tomorrow morning if you want." She looked at him. He looked back at her, his grey eyes clear for once. Without the careful management he usually kept over everything his face might reveal. "I'll go tomorrow," she said. "Tonight I'm staying here." He reached into the pocket of his trousers, folded on the chair beside the cot, and his hand came out with the pocket watch. He turned it once and held it out to her. She looked at it. "That belongs to you." "I know," he said. "I want you to hold it for a minute." He paused. Something was being said here that he was doing the work of saying for the first time. "I've had people in my life who knew what that watch was worth. Not one of them ever held it in their hand and thought about what it meant to lose it. You did that, for a stranger, in a city where you had every reason not to." His voice was rough and he did not look comfortable, but he did not stop. "I have been alone in every way that matters for 19 years. I had convinced myself I preferred it." José took the watch from his hand. It was warm from his skin. "I think," Marcello said very carefully, "that I would like you to stay. Not tonight. Past tonight." She turned the watch over. "Read the engraving again. Sempre con te." "You'd have to meet my mother," she said. "I know. She might not remember your name the second time. Then I'll introduce myself every time." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, Toronto was buried in the first real snow of the season. Marcello Falco, the most feared man in the city by the accounts of many credible people, lay on a cot in his own basement with a bullet wound in his side, and his hands still and his eyes on her face, waiting. "Okay," José said, "I'll stay." 12 months later, the Falco Foundation's annual benefit filled the ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York from floor to ceiling. Politicians were there, and developers, and people whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. There were also men in excellent suits who watched the exits in addition to everything else, which was simply how these evenings worked. José Falco stood near the head table in a gown the color of dark amber that a seamstress in Kensington Market had made specifically for her wide shoulders and her full stomach, and the way good fabric needed to move with her hips rather than against them. Her dark hair was down. The pocket watch hung on a slim chain at her collarbone, where Marcello had clasped it himself on the morning she finally came home. Her mother sat at a table near the edge of the room with a private nurse and a small dish of gâteau breton she had loved since José was small. She was having a good night. She had recognized José from across the room and lifted her hand in a little wave, and José had waved back, and that had been enough. The hotel manager who had passed José over twice for a supervisory position, the one who had said, with careful professional neutrality, that she wasn't the right fit for front-facing roles, was across the ballroom. He had noticed her. She could see it in the way he had gone very still. She met his eyes and smiled, pleasantly and briefly, and looked away. Marcello came to stand beside her. He put his hand at the small of her back with the ease of someone who had been doing it for months and intended to keep doing it indefinitely. He said nothing for a moment, which was something he had gotten better at, the kind of silence that was company rather than distance. "Your mother is on her second helping of cake," he said. "She loves that cake." "I know, I had them make 3 portions." She looked at him sideways. The quality everyone talked about, the ice, the cold that had kept every ambitious woman in the city at arm's length for 2 decades, was simply not there. He was still the man Rinaldo approached with particular care, still the man whose name rearranged the power in a room. He was still, fundamentally, himself. But he was standing in a room full of people who had spent years trying to get his attention, and he was not looking at any of them. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. The pocket watch caught the chandelier light, warm silver against her collarbone, and somewhere beneath the hum of the ballroom and the sound of her mother's laughter, Josée thought, "Sempre con te." It had turned out, against every reasonable probability, to be true.